Hello everyone, this is Miss Smith. Let's talk about the rhetorical situation because understanding the rhetorical situation will be very important in the writing assignments we complete this semester. And so you may be thinking that rhetoric is a bad thing. You may have heard the word rhetoric used in negative contexts, such as the used car salesman trying to unload an unreliable car, or the politician making false promises just to get people's votes, or someone who's just being dishonest or trying to spin a story to make it sound believable. But in an academic context, especially in English composition, we want to define rhetoric as ethical persuasion, using the best possible means of communication to convince your readers of your credibility as a writer or communicator. And so in order to be a persuasive and convincing writer or communicator, you must first assess the rhetorical situation. Now you should have read about this in your textbook already for this week's assignment, but let's just kind of talk about what that means. The rhetorical situation is essentially the circumstances that cause you to have a need to write or communicate. I'll say that again. The rhetorical situation is essentially the circumstances that cause you to have a need to write or communicate. For every writing assignment in this course, you must consider the rhetorical situation. It will give you your best chance at writing an effective essay. Whenever we write, we have a set of circumstances that prompt us, that create a need for us to communicate. So let's kind of unpack this a little bit. So for example, if your car has a flat tire and you're stranded on the side of the road, you may text a relative to come and pick you up. That text message was prompted by a set of circumstances, a rhetorical situation, that caused your need to communicate. Okay? If you're applying for admission to a four-year college or university and you're required to write an admissions essay, that essay, that piece of writing, was created or prompted by a set of circumstances, by a rhetorical situation that caused your need for writing. Okay? And so again, the rhetorical situation is just a set of circumstances that surrounds the need that we have to create a piece of written work or to communicate. There are five components of the rhetorical situation, and we must understand those. And so we have purpose, we have audience, we have stance, genre, and medium/design. So let's look at each of those in detail. And so in terms of purpose, it's really the first step in understanding the rhetorical situation. All writing has a purpose. A writer can have one or more purposes at the same time. You want to focus though on your primary purpose for writing. So you may write an essay and your purpose is to persuade, but your purpose may also be to inform. And so you want to figure out which is your primary purpose in your writing. Knowing our primary reason for writing can help us shape that writing and understand how to proceed with it. Okay, that makes sense. When we know exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish, we can allow our writing to conform to that purpose. Refer to your textbook for useful tips on ways to identify your purpose. Okay, the book talks about this in a lot more detail, so make sure that you refer back to that in your reading so that you can understand how to identify your purpose. Audience. You must ask yourself, who will read your writing? You must also consider whom you are targeting with your writing. An effective writer or communicator will understand his or her audience, their knowledge, needs, and expectations. Your audience will interpret your writing according to their own expectations and experiences, not yours. So in other words, it's kind of that golden rule in writing of write for your reader and not for yourself. Okay? Write for your reader and not for yourself. You may already have a knowledge base about something you're writing, but you have to consider what your reader may or may not know, may or may not understand, okay, so that you can communicate to them effectively. The book also talks about known audiences, unknown audiences, and multiple audiences. So make sure that you go back and read that as it is helpful information. In this course, I am always your audience for your writing. As a student, you should aim to persuade me that you understand the assignment given and can meet the assignment guidelines. Okay, and so if I ask you to write a 4 to 6 page essay and you give me a 2 page essay, then you have not met the assignment guidelines. You're not meeting the audience needs. You're not showing me that you understand the assignment and what it calls for. You're not showing me that you're being credible in that manner. Okay? And so you want to make sure that you are responding to your audience appropriately. If you submit an essay to me and your essay uses any version of text speak, for example, if instead of the word YOU, you just use the letter U to communicate, okay, you're showing me that you don't understand your audience. I'm your college English instructor. You should always make sure that you use correct grammar and sentence structure when you communicate with me, because I will be evaluating your writing. And so you want to always consider your audience. Your audience will affect how you write and how you communicate. Stance. Your stance is essentially your attitude toward your topic. The way you express that stance affects the way you come across to your audience as a writer and a person. The attitude and tone of your writing will reflect on you and will either convince, persuade, there's that word again, the audience that you know what you're talking about, or that you're uncertain about what you're talking about. And so the book talks about avoiding some of those qualifiers that can detract from a confident, authoritative tone. And so you want to make sure that you go back and read that as well, okay? So that you don't include any of that in your writing, that you're taking away those qualifiers that would hinder you in your writing and communicating. We have to also consider genre as a part of the rhetorical situation. Genres are kinds of writing. The writing genre can affect the style of writing and the writer's approach to an assignment. It is important that you understand the genre of writing. In this course, I will tell you the genre for each writing assignment. Be sure to read the information provided in your textbook to help you meet the requirements of the genre. And finally, medium/design. Media should always be considered as part of the rhetorical situation. Your media affects how your communication is delivered and received by your audience. So for example, if you're delivering a speech to a group of classmates, the medium of face-to-face communication allows you to adjust your communication based on audience response. Okay, and so if you're delivering the speech and your audience seems a little confused or unsure or disinterested, you have the ability right there on the spot to adjust how you communicate to try to make sure that your audience is understanding what it is you're saying. However, if you are submitting your rough draft to me in a Microsoft Word format, and if that's your medium, you cannot gauge audience response. You cannot gauge my response when I read it because we will not be in a face-to-face situation. I will be reading your essays probably when I'm at home or when I'm on campus, okay, in my office. And so you won't be able to gauge my response. Or answer any questions for me on the spot. Therefore, you'll want to make sure that you use proper grammar and sentence mechanics, and be sure your communication is as clear as possible. You want to proofread your writing before you submit it. You want to read it out loud to make sure that it's sounding right to your ears, as well as your work in proofreading it visually with your eyes. And so you want to make sure that you understand that the medium of communication can affect how you communicate as well. And so the writing assignments you submit this semester should demonstrate your understanding of the rhetorical situation. Okay, we're only going to talk about this one time in this detail, but you want to never forget to identify your purpose for your writing, your audience, your genre of writing, your stance, and the medium you must use to communicate. Also, you can use the rhetorical situation for writing assignments in other classes or even in the workplace. Understanding the circumstances that prompt your need to write will help you become a stronger, more persuasive writer and communicator. If you have questions, please let me know.